The M20J 201, in my opinion, is hands down the best Mooney M20 variant to buy. You get Mooney speed without 6-cylinder fuel and overhaul prices, 200 horsepower IO360, not a monster to maintain, 9 to 10 gallons per hour if you treat it nicely. It doesn't get better than this in any other M20 variant. If you're standing in a hangar staring at a 201 and wondering whether to buy it, the real question isn't, is it a good airplane? It's, does it actually fit what I do on a good Tuesday with people, bags, and weather? That's the only way a 201 makes sense. Not as a spec sheet hero, but as a fast little traveling machine that either matches your mission or doesn't. On performance, the myth and the reality are surprisingly close once you strip the brochure gloss off. Mooney and the magazines originally sold the 201 as a little rocket. Cruise in the high 160s knots if you run it hard. Very flattering range numbers if you pull the power back and baby it along. All of that assumes perfect day and the airplane on its best behavior. When you stop reading marketing and just listen to owners, everything collapses into a tighter, much more useful box. Everyone from buyer guides to owner forums says the same thing. Call it about the mid-150s when you're cruising like a grown-up and fuel burn lives right around 10 gallons an hour, give or take. The way people actually fly them is much simpler than the power charts suggest. Without oxygen, most owners live between 7,000 and 9,000 feet, high enough for decent efficiency and smooth air, low enough to stay away from cannulas and headaches. With oxygen on board and a proper trip to fly, they go up into the 10,000 to 12,000 foot band, where the air is cooler, the engine is happier, and you might pick up a couple of bonus knots. Power management is almost a standard recipe. Throttle forward, prop somewhere around 2,400 to 2,500, then lean to wherever you and your engine are happy. Some run a little rich, some right at peak, some a bit lean of peak if the fuel system behaves. That tends to land you in the 60 to 70% power bracket. In that regime, the aeroplane just sits there giving you something around high 150s knots on roughly 9 to 10 gallons an hour. That's why Mooney owners are smug at the fuel pump. You're basically burning DA-40 fuel for grown-up traveling speed. In the real world, a normal IFR leg in a 201 with full fuel and adult reserves is 300 to 500 nautical miles, about 2 to 3.5 hours block, cruising in that 150 to 160 knot window. The 1,000-mile ultra-economy numbers that live in the POH at very low power are mathematically real, but live in the stunt category. You have to baby the airplane at low power for hours to see them, and most people don't fly that way. Day to day, owners treat the 201 as roughly a 600 to 700 nautical mile machine at sensible power, then derate that again when there's wind, weather, diversions, or human bladders in the picture. Once you've got that speed and fuel picture in your head, the big question becomes payload. On paper, the loading story is romantic. Early manuals and stripped-down spec sheets talk about a healthy max gross, light empty weights in the mid-1600s, and a standard useful load that looks huge for a 4-cylinder retract. With 64 gallons usable on board, about 384 pounds of fuel, the bare numbers on a light factory airplane make it look like you can have both all the fuel and all the people. In the real world, nobody is flying that brochure airplane. Radios, IFR panels, autopilots, better interiors, paint, and years of upgrades all push the empty weight up. A lot of working 201s end up with useful loads in the 850-950 pound band once you account for real equipment, and something around 900 pounds useful is a fair typical J number. With full fuel in that airplane, you've poured about 384 pounds into the wings, and you've got just over 500 pounds left for people and bags. With full tanks, it's basically a 3 adults plus bags airplane. 2 bigger adults and 2 kids work. 3 average-size adults, and some luggage work. 2 adults and a ridiculous amount of luggage definitely work. The fantasy of 4 full-size adults, bags, full fuel, and a big non-stop leg just doesn't match how most airframes are actually built and equipped. That's why experienced owners keep repeating that speed and range are great, but once the tanks are full, payload is what you're managing. If you really fill the seats, the trade-off shows up fast. Take that same 900 useful 201, put 4 average 180-pound adults in it and a modest pile of shared baggage. You've eaten most of the useful load, and there's only a small slice of weight left for fuel, a fraction of the tanks. At that point, even if you're smart about power, you're realistically looking at roughly a 200 to 300 nautical mile airplane 4 up. Perfectly fine for regional hops, but not the long-range Mooney game the brochures whisper about. Drop back to 3 adults in bags, and the airplane suddenly looks like the one Mooney advertised again. There is a wrinkle with the later airplanes. Some of the round window J's picked up a gross weight increase to around 2,900 pounds. If the empty weight hasn't crept up too badly on those airframes, you're now talking something like 1,230 pounds of useful load. Full fuel still costs you about 384 pounds, but you've got more than 840 pounds left for people in bags. 4 180-pound adults sit nicely in that box with room left for a decent amount of baggage, and suddenly a genuine 4-adult full-fuel loadout makes sense. 4-up range in those airplanes looks more like mid-300s to mid-400s of nautical miles with proper reserves instead of 200 to 300. The catch is there aren't that many of those around compared to the older J's, and most of what's on the market sits in that 850 to 950 pound useful load window with full fuel payloads around 500 to 600 pounds. If we walk around to the price tag in the logbooks, the picture is pretty consistent there too. In Europe and the US, late 80s J's with decent avionics and mid-time engines tend to live somewhere around the mid-5 figures in pounds or low 6 figures in dollars. Think roughly 70-something to 100-odd grand in the UK, and about 110 to 150,000 in the US for a nice one. Early 77 to 80 birds with older panels and more vintage interiors sit lower, up in the high 80s into low hundreds in dollars depending on engine time and panel. So the 201 usually prices above an Aero or a Centurion but below a later SR20 or a Bonanza. What you're really paying for is knots per liter. You're not buying cabin volume or new car smell, you're buying speed on modest fuel. Because it's a Mooney, there are a few non-negotiables on any pre-buy. Wet wings are the big one. The tanks are integral, not bladders, so any fuel leak story matters. You want to see who resealed them, when, and with what reputation. A proper strip and reseal by a known shop is a huge plus. A history of little patch jobs and weeping seams with no full reseal is either a price adjuster or a reason to walk. Under the skin, there's a steel tube cabin cage, so you want corrosion checks in the logs and eyeballs on the structure, especially if the airplane lived near salt or on de-iced runways. Landing gear is another big ticket. Nose gear truss and main gear truss need to be straight, corrosion-free, and well-rigged. Bent or badly repaired gear is both expensive and a clue that someone's arrival was more event than landing. Up front, cowlings and baffling age like any high-vibration aluminum. They crack, go out of alignment, or start beating on the firewall, and cowl flaps and baffles can buzz themselves to bits. None of that is a reason to run away, but it all needs to be found and priced in. Control rigging, trim, and any speed brakes are the same story. A badly rigged Mooney can lose you several knots and can hide past damage, and speed brakes are great in a clean airframe, but one more system to keep healthy. The red flags are mostly common sense. Multiple tank leaks, fixed with patch jobs and no proper reseal, obvious gaps in the logbooks, gear damage without top-tier repair documentation, or the classic hangar queen that flew almost nothing for years and is suddenly back on the market. Those are the airplanes that turn into 10 grand plus first annuals once a shop starts digging. On running costs, everyone's spreadsheet is different, but they all rhyme. Figure 9 to 11 gallons an hour, so at typical U.S. prices, you're roughly at $100 an hour in direct costs. On top of that, sit the fixed bills, and an annual that's a few grand on a well-kept J but can jump toward 5 figures if you're catching up deferred work. One owner who tracked it properly ended up in the mid-hundreds per hour all in once everything was blended together. As a rule of thumb, if you fly about 100 hours a year, expect total ownership to land somewhere around $15,000 to $35,000 per year. The M20 has downsides, and one of the most obvious one is how tight the cabin is. It's narrow and relatively low compared to a 182 or a Bonanza, so if you're tall or broad, it feels more like strapping the airplane on than stepping into a lounge. It has a bit of a reputation for noise and vibration. Good ANR headsets and a balanced prop help a lot. Because it's so clean, you can't be lazy about speed management on descent or into the circuit. If you just point the nose down, it will happily build speed and arrive high and hot. It isn't hard to manage, but it does expect you to fly it properly. If you're in that $120,000 to $150,000 money and just looking sideways at what else you could buy, the usual suspect is a Piper Arrow, which will generally be cheaper to buy, has a bigger and friendlier cabin, easy parts and very forgiving handling. It's still a retract and still complex, so it works fine as a time builder, but you're usually looking at 130 to 140 knots. So you're giving away a good 15 to 25 knots to a sorted J for similar or higher fuel burn. A Cessna 182 fixed gear will trundle along at 135 to 140 knots on a bit more fuel, haul more people and stuff, and be happier off short or rough strips. The retractable version is a little quicker, but drags its own gear system baggage around. If your life is 4 people, short strips and high DA days, the 182 beats the 201. If your life is paved strips, 2 or 3 people and you care about speed, the J is the better tool. At the top end, you sometimes see the bottom of the debonair or early Bonanza market in the same money. You get a lovely cabin and beach ride quality, but you're now burning in the mid-teens per hour on a 6-cylinder and paying beach class maintenance. Inside the Mooney family, a well-sorted M20E or F can be cheaper to buy and not much slower than a J. For pure value per knot, a good E is arguably the better deal. A tired Ovation occasionally drops into J territory but brings IO 550 fuel flows and 6-cylinder bills. If you don't care about the J badge, a really well-sorted E or a good Arrow can be the value kings at the cost of 5 to 15 knots. So if your main mission is IFR cross-country in the 300 to 700 nautical mile band off paved strips, and you're usually flying solo, then a 201 absolutely belongs on your short list. If what you really care about is cabin space, rough field performance, and 4-up utility more than raw speed, a fixed gear 182, Archer, or similar will treat you better. So that's it for today's video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. It goes a long way for us.